Is your business and projects feeling very chaotic and disorganized? If that is said, just listen out to this video. We're going to actually be covering 3 signs that you might need a project manager. If you find this video helpful, please like, share it with your network, and also subscribe to the channel as we'll be covering more details around this topic. I am also going to provide solutions in future videos to the 3 behaviors or signs that I actually mentioned today. So with that said, let's get ready and let's move forward into why you may need a project manager. Hey, so let's start off with the history of project management. So project management has actually been around for several years, and we can actually stem this all the way back to ancient Egypt times, to where they built the pyramids and even the Great Wall of China. All of those structures, infrastructures actually needed project managers. We can see roots of it all the way back to there. Then came in 1917 Henry Gantt, who created the Gantt chart. And of course, this Gantt chart is a visualization tool to help us keep track of schedules. It's something that's simple and easy that you can kind of just look at and say, oh, here's where my project is, or here's where my project is supposed to be. Then in the 1950s, there was the critical path method that came out, as well as the program evaluation review techniques. And these were actual tools that was used during the Cold War to make sure that the actual tasks that moved the project forward, and then for the PERT, that was there to make sure that we captured any uncertainties in the project. And we still use those methods to this day. Then came out PMI, or the Project Management Institute, and they came out in 1969, and their biggest thing was pushing knowledge and growth for the profession, but also made project management globally recognized. They created the PIM book, which is a project management body of knowledge guide, and they continue to update this on a yearly basis, or I think there's a couple of generations out now. But essentially speaking, they standardized the learnings for project management across the board, and has included plenty of different certifications to ensure that professionals have the knowledge base they need to move projects forward. Then there's also the agile method that came out in the 20th century. This agile method was used to kind of take projects off of that traditional waterfall style. Essentially speaking, we used to have projects that flowed from task to task. But after moving it off of the waterfall style, we were actually able to do projects whether it was in increments or by sprints. That included a Scrum Master, use of a Kanban board, and other different technologies or techniques that you can actually use to incorporate and keeping the project a little bit more liquid. And I wanted to cover project management history for the fact that it's very important. It's been around for such a long time, and although we finally coined it a phrase, it's there to show us that we need these items and these practices and professionals in our systems today. Why? Because a project is something that is very complex, and I think that's where project managers as a profession come and step in. So today I prepared for you 3 signs that we'll walk through. The first sign that we can actually get started with is missed deadlines. This is a big sign that your projects may actually need a project manager. And there's a lot of factors that actually go into missing a deadline. There may not be stakeholders that are managing the deadline correctly. That is where project managers can actually support the team in ensuring that the project stays on the flow that it needs to stay on. We do that by keeping track of what needs to happen in some of those critical paths, but we also make sure that projects move forward and do the actual tasks that needed when it is needed. You may have some tasks that might require another task to be completed before you actually get that particular task done. And the project manager's goal is to actually identify some of those tasks and remove some of those roadblocks ahead of time, just to ensure that those tasks get hit on time. Our stakeholders might say, hey, I know that you need this done by this time, however, I'm out on vacation, or I'm not available to actually get this done for you at this time. The project manager can actually mitigate those conversations and maybe even have some of those conversations ahead of time to ensure that the project schedule is accurate. So managing the stakeholders is one of the biggest things that project managers do. Another part of managing deadlines is internal deadlines. You have your team, but without anybody kind of following up and ensuring that the team doesn't have any impedances on any of the work that they're doing, they may leave tasks to be undone on time or just forgotten, honestly. If your tasks are falling behind or falling off the radar, the project manager is there to make sure and ensure that these tasks stay in place. Sometimes our teams might just miss the fact that there's a hard deadline. You have to get this website launched by November 12th, which means There may be some other hard deadlines. If your team takes 2 weeks to do the design for the website, then you gotta plan that out so that you can get design done and then start designing the components for the website. If you need to get copy done, but there might be some copy changes and you don't know when that hard deadline might be, that is where projects can kind of start to creep outside of the schedule. And these are the things that are important that a project manager can actually pull together and ensure that the team stays focused. And also support the team in moving those things forward. These unclear deadlines can also be missed if we just simply don't plan for them. Now, let's talk about sign number 2, and that is inefficient resource allocation. Where are your resources being allocated, and are they actively and effectively being allocated, right? And I say active and effective for 2 reasons. Active because they're actually there doing the work, and effectively meaning that they're in the right position to do the work that they need to get done. Because resources is very finite and cost a lot of money, you want to make sure that you're getting what you deserve out of what it is that you're trying to do, right? And I say that to say because we can have a person who is a copywriter doing design, but is that the best use of their time? Or is that the best use of their strengths, for example? And that copywriter might be able to do a little bit of design, but it may take them 5 hours or 3 times the amount of time it might take an actual designer to get it across to the finish line. So we just need to be mindful of those 2 things, whether they're active and whether they're effective. Choosing the right resource is something you want to make sure you're seeing in your project. How do you do that? Make sure that the people that you're picking and the resources that you have are allocated effectively. Also, make sure that the contractors or the vendors you might be using are the right vendors for you. Take bids. Make sure that you are getting the right people and the right teams in place to accomplish the tasks that you need, because having the wrong resources will definitely drag out your project, both time-wise and also both budget-wise. Another thing that you might see is a resource might lack the job or understanding of that technical role, right? So a developer may be great at developing a website or software development, but they may not be as good as writing copy. You want to make sure that you have content strategists and also your copywriter there to do the things that they're great at, whereas your developer is there to do the thing that they're great at. Don't try to switch up the roles. Don't try to make it where you're filling in these gaps. And if you're finding that you're doing this on your projects, then oftentimes it's a problem of resource allocation. Oftentimes you might actually sit back and who really needs to be on these projects. And sometimes you might just need a project manager. Another thing is just resource overspend, which kind of combines all of what I just said into one. Your resources are spent doing things that they're not able to do, or not supposed to do, or not trained to do. And then also, you may have too much resources. You may not need 10 developers for a 5-page website, or 3 designers for 2 brochures. But at the same time, you may have a 100-page website and you might need 2 developers on there. So you just keep in mind what you may need for your projects and their resources, and ensure that your project is done both on time and the deliverables are actually what you want them to be. The last thing I wanted to cover with you is poor communication and lack of collaboration. Now, this can happen both internally and externally. Internally, a team doesn't seem to feel cohesive. Internally, a team doesn't seem to have the right information. Internally, one person may have the information that they don't need. Meanwhile, the person that does need it may not have that information. But what do you do to solve that? What are some things that you have in place? A lot of the times, that information and sharing information and communicating information can lend to support even more confusion and even less collaboration. So you have some folks that are in office and some folks that are remote. And your remote team, you're going to have to use tools to communicate to each other, whether it's Slack, whether it is Zoom, whether it is your project manager tool, email. You're going to have to find channels that are going to be able to communicate when it comes to a remote team. However, when you have a team in person, you also still need those channels. And I'm going to give you an example. Your working office team is focused on getting something done and they're on a tight deadline. So let's say Sally is trying to get this particular thing completed by end of day. And they're focused and they're knocking it out and they're in a really good groove. And then Tom comes along and says, "Hey Sally, how was your day? I need you to do this, this, and this." Now Sally has to stop what she's doing, focus on what Tom has said, write those things down, and then move forward. Whereas Tom didn't know that Sally was heads down and focused, didn't mean to interrupt Sally, but now Sally has to get back on the track to ensure that she is focused and can do exactly what she was intending to do prior to Tom's interruption. Whereas Tom could have sent this over into a chat of some sort, whether it's GChat or whether it's Slack, right? And then Sally could have took it upon herself so that when she had time, start reviewing some of those items. And I say that to say that is just an example of what it may look like when communication is a little bit disruptive or lacking, and that can kind of break down collaboration amongst team members. Something else to keep in mind internally is where information goes. You might want to have a conversation quick. Is email the right way to do that? Is email going to get you that information quickly? Or chances are email is going to be something that get answered at the end of the day. Chances are your team is going to check Slack, GChat, and all of those instant messengers a little bit quicker than they are going to check their emails. So deciding upon what is necessary in which situations is very key and important when identifying how to improve some of those signs. But if you're not having these conversations, that is a big sign that you may have some internal communication problems. And also that then leads to disruption in collaboration. Another thing to keep in mind is external communication. External communication is just as important as internal communication. This time I'm talking about how do you communicate and what do you communicate to your client is very important as well. Sometimes something might just need a phone call, whereas another thing might need an email to be as detailed as possible. But then also meetings, and I didn't talk about meetings for internal yet, but I'm going to wrap internal meetings and external meetings together. Meetings are great when it comes to collaborating. Do not get rid of meetings, but make sure you're having meetings effectively. Make sure your team is meeting for a reason. Make sure your stakeholders are meeting for a reason. Make sure the right people are in those conversations and in those meetings so that they are effective in those meetings. And let's say you have a meeting that's an hour and you're showing the client two things. You're showing the client web design and you're showing the client a brochure design or a marketing plan. Don't have your web developer or your web strategist sit in that meeting for the whole hour, or vice versa, your marketing strategist sit in that meeting for the whole hour when there are parts of half an hour in between. So you can say, hey, join at this time, or you know what, let's go through web first so that this way my web designer or my web strategist can kind of come on for the meeting when that particular conversation is over. We don't want to waste anyone's time. We want to be as efficient as possible, and we want to make sure that meetings are effective. Chances are, if your meeting is 30 minutes, you can make it 15. If your meeting is an hour, you can make it 45. So work through some times with your teams to see how you're effectively using meetings, because the sign is you're not meeting enough, or the meetings don't feel like they're very effective. And that is where poor communication and a lack of collaboration starts to creep in. So, and that goes for both internal with your team and also external with your collaborators and with your stakeholders and with your clients. Now, number 2 is don't waste your time sending multiple information to your client. Now, this is very important. Identify who needs to send what to your client. If you have Sally and Tom, and Sally is an account manager and Tom is a project manager, what does Sally send to the client versus what does Tom send to the client? What communication happens? If folks don't know what that looks like, chances are that might be a sign that your collaboration and team communication is struggling a little bit. Is it that Sally sent over something to client at 10 o'clock and then Tom sent it over to the client at 10:30 and Tom wasn't CC'd on this particular email that Sally sent this morning? Does Tom know that this email went out? No, but Tom sends it again. Why? Because Tom knows, hey, this got to go out. In that moment, now the client received the same email for the same thing twice and from 2 different people. That looks very disorganized as a company and as a business, and that can also affect your relationship with the client. So we want to make sure that everyone is aware who sends what to the client. We want to be very mindful of how we're communicating and when we're communicating. And the last thing is lack of communication tools, right? So if you find yourself in your business sending things through just email and you have no instant messenger, you have no way of communicating on a project management tool, then these are some signs that you might actually need to invest a little bit just supporting effective communication as best as you can. Sometimes you might see that your team just doesn't know what's going on, and that can lead to very big confusions and setbacks in your projects. Now, those are the 3 signs that we covered today. I can't just say the solution is hire a project manager, but there's a reason why we need to talk about it a little bit in depth, because although you can hire a project manager, these are some tools and techniques as a project manager that you will need to implement with your team to further improve on these. I appreciate talking to all of you. Have a great and fantastic day. Keep making your projects great and keep moving forward.